So good afternoon, everybody. This is episode 4 of my new podcast channel. And I've been thinking of different ideas about what I could talk about, what might be quite interesting. And one of the topics I wanted to talk about was, as a Sunseeker salesman, what is my favourite Sunseeker? Now, that's a really, really hard question to answer. And I've actually had to break it up into decades because there's certain boats from the decades that are my favourites, and it wouldn't be fair to overlook any of those. So what I've done is I've separated it into pre-90s, pre-2000s, pre-2010s, and then 2010 to the current day. Because it, like I say, in all of those decades, there's certain boats which I personally really like, some of which you may have heard of, some have not. And if you haven't, then have a Google, do a Google image search, because I've done it myself. There's some great images of these boats out there, so go and have a look. So let's start with the pre-90s. Now, the pre-90s really probably was one of the heydays for Sunseeker. It was when Robert and his team were designing some of the most iconic boats at the time. They were so developed and futuristic in relation to what else was in the market. And there's 3 boats which, to me, really stand out from that time frame. The Tomahawk 37, the Portofino 31, and, of course, the Malibu 47, which is one of those boats, unless you know about it, perhaps you wouldn't ever have heard about it, but it is a cool boat. But let's start with the smallest. So let's start with the Portofino 31. The Portofino 31, I think, really is such a good design. I mean, even now you go into the cockpit of them, and the cockpit for the size of boat is great. They've got a forward cabin, or a forward sleeping area, and then a little aft cabin which you can sort of crawl into. So they can sleep 4 people. But the cockpit, really, to me, what stands out on that boat is it gives you so much room for that size of boat. A great handling boat. We sold a number over the years. A lot of them have got the petrol with 271 Volvos in, and then the later ones have got the KD 41s, the 200 horsepower diesels. Some have been re-engined, and you do see the odd boat that comes through with maybe D4s or CAD 43s or something like that. But on the whole, the AD 200s or 41s, whatever people want to call them, on the whole, they also did some updates. So the early boats had like aluminium windscreens, whereas the later ones had the stainless windscreens. When just little tweaks like that made the later ones so much nicer. The classic colour for me on those has got to be the grey hull with the blue band. I think that's really the perfect colour for them. A boat that the 31 morphed into was called a Portofino 32, and that also is a very nice boat. And really, the reasons it's so nice is probably because it's based on a 31. But enough on that. Let's then talk about the Tomahawk 37. Now, the Tomahawk 37, there's certain images of that boat which I think you can imagine, in Mallorca in the 80s, cruising along. They were designed for speed. So, again, they had the Volvo V8s, the 271s. Some of them also had the 330 petrols. And then later boats had the CAD 42s and CAD 43s. And some have got AD 200s, to be fair, as well. Now, the 37-foot Tomahawk, although it's actually slightly longer than the 31, in volume-wise, accommodation, etc., is actually smaller. It's a very sleek boat. And even now, it looks the part. As the 80s sort of disappeared into the early 90s, the 37 actually became the 37 Tomahawk Mark II, and that had wings on the radar arch, had steps on, like louvers on the transom, tiny little changes. But if you know your Sunseekers, then there's a few things there to look out for. Both the Portofino 31 and the Tomahawk have got those iconic sort of round stainless scallops in the rear of both sides, port and starboard, as engine air intakes, and they're just so cool. To me, it's real sort of iconic Sunseeker design, and it goes to show you what great boats they were back then. The Malibu 47, I have to admit, I've been on one once, and I've never sold one, but I've been on one once, and it's a big boat, the Malibu 47. And at the time, you can imagine, there's a few images on Google image search of the Malibu at the boat shows, and it must have been such a cool boat back in the day. It's a really big boat for the 80s. So let's fast forward a bit and go pre-2000. So in the pre-2000s, you've sort of got anything for obviously the 90s, but there's 3 boats which stand out for me. There's the Command 51, which is, for me, quite a special boat. The Superhawk 48 Mark 1, I would add, and the Renegade 60. Now, all of those boats, again, have a look. They're all very special. The Superhawk 48 was a real James Bond 50-foot sports boat, open, very sexy looking boat, huge foredeck. I mean, the foredeck's got to be, I've never measured it, but the foredeck alone's got to be 25 foot, I imagine. It's just, the proportions of that boat are just absolutely awesome. It was available with twins and triples. The triples were CAD 43s at the time. And I believe some of the boats that went to the States actually had the triple magnums in. And they must have been awesome. Never been on a triple engined petrol Superhawk 48. I've been on plenty of triple engine diesel 48s. And the only thing I would say is the performance is a little bit slow. You think you've got 3 engines, but you'll struggle really to, certainly nowadays, to see 40 knots in them. Perhaps when they were new and the engines were fresh, then perhaps you'd get a bit more. So that's the Superhawk 48s. Again, have a look. Command 51. Now, very fortunate as a family, we owned one of these for over 10 years, and that's why I said at the start there, it's got a special place for me, because as a boat, I think it is absolutely beautiful, and it's got to be one of the best looking Sunseekers, I think. It was available as a twin and a 3 cabin option. A lot of them had the 2-stroke Detroits in. The one we had the MAN 680s, which was a lovely combination. Some of them had Caterpillars, but the majority of them probably had the Detroits in, and then the later boats, the MANs. The Command 51 had a tender garage, so there wasn't many boats in the 90s that had tender garages. The Command 51 was designed to take a small jet ski. If you know your Sea-Doos, then the Sea-Doo SPX generation, which now when you look at them looks so dated in relation to the jet skis of today, but it was a cool boat. We actually squeezed a little Zodiac in the back, which sort of fitted with a bit of persuasion and the tubes being deflated. But the 51 Camargue, I think, is an absolutely beautiful boat. Great sea boat. We did over 1,000 hours in that particular boat, and never missed a beat. The engines were awesome, and it was a 40-knot boat. So when you actually think it was sort of pushing 30 tons fully loaded, it would actually go faster than a Superhawk 48, which is mad, really. On the performance side again, which is an even faster boat, was the Renegade 60. Now, the Renegade 60 at the time was the flagship for the Sunseeker range, and the Renegade 60 was jet powered. It's the only Sunseeker, or one of the only Sunseekers ever been made as a jet powered boat. The jets were run by big MANs. I think from memory they were like 1,500 mans or 1,300 mans. Very complicated, but as a performance boat, by all accounts, are fantastic. I went on one years ago when I was younger, much younger, called Macandra, which was in Poole, and the chap who owned Sunseeker Sales Group at the time, or the son of them, called Marcus Dodd, he took me out on it, and it was amazing. I mean, this thing did 40 knots and absolutely ginormous. Open cockpit boat. Hardtop was available, but this one was an open cockpit boat. So a 60-foot open boat, sort of chomping along at 40 plus knots, was a sight to behold, really, and a great image for the brand. If we move now to post-2000s, there's 3 boats here, which no particular order: Manhattan 50, Manhattan 60, and a Superhawk 43. Manhattan 50, great boat, great all-rounder, and even now they still fetch really, really strong money. There's not that many of them on the market, and when they come on the market, they sell. But it was one of the first boats in the market, really, to have the midships, mid-cabin, which has become an industry standard now, really, for anything over 45 foot. 3 cabins, like I say, midships cabin, great flybridge, very futuristic design when it first came out, and it was a really, really popular boat, sold very, very well. Manhattan 60, one of my favourite boats, and I often joke I've never sold a Manhattan 60, and it's probably one of my all-time favourite boats. It ticks all the boxes. It's 3 cabins, there's loads of space, there's very little compromises and head height, lots of room. It's got a hydraulic platform, just a really nice boat. Again, massively popular. It was a great med boat, but I've never sold one. I've had a few for sale, but unfortunately never actually closed the deal on them. I've got a client at the moment looking to buy one, and can I find him the right one? No, I can't. So perhaps it's one of those boats I'm just destined not to sell. The other boat I mentioned there was the Superhawk 43. Beautiful boat. Was featured in the James Bond film Casino Royale. You may have seen that, and it's the scene where the girl gets taken out to the baddie's boat, which is also a Sunseeker, 37 metre, and it was a special Superhawk. It didn't have any rear seats, any sun pad, just a big open deck. But the real Superhawks are brilliant. They're triples, twins, Arnesons, Volvos. There's different options on the engines, but great boat. And even now they look fantastic. They really do. Not huge amount of accommodation, but more than enough accommodation for a couple overnight. A nice sort of open layout cabin as such with a galley, nice cockpit. Performance wise, realistically on those you're looking between sort of late 30s realistically to late 40s. You might see one that will do 50 knots, but a really nice looking boat. Let's go now from post 2010, so sort of more current day stuff really. So on the current day stuff, where do we start? I mean, there's lots of boats there to have a look at. The Predator 60 is one of my favourites. The Manhattan 52, which is really a replacement times 2 of the Manhattan 50, and also then the 28 metre, the Sunseeker 28 metre. Let's start with the Predator 60. So in 2010, Sunseeker brought out the Predator 60, which was, in my opinion, a real traditional Sunseeker. Lots of space, great day boat, great overnighter, great long distance, huge cockpit, massive cockpit. Very similar to that of the Predator 61 or Predator 68 from sort of the early 2000s. And it really ticked a lot of boxes for people. It had a hydraulic platform. It could also take a Williams 325. All of the cabins had plenty of space. I was fortunate enough to sell one. Probably still now, the client who owns that boat will laugh if he ever hears this, but he probably won't get this far in the podcast. But it was one of my favourite boats. His particular boat's black. It's got the twin IPS 1200. It was one of the first Sunseekers of the size to use the bigger IPS option. And that boat, I think it did 44 knots on the IPS 1200. Beautifully, effortlessly fast. You could have a shaft drive option as well, which was up to the 1200 shafts. 3 cabins. The master cabin's a really good size with a nice ensuite, forward cabin ensuite, and then a twin third cabin, which doesn't have its own heads but shares the forward cabin. Brilliant boat, really, really good looking boat. The Manhattan 52 has to be on the list. I mean, that's a late 2010 plus boat because it was launched in 2017. It was launched at a really attractive price by Sunseeker, which was really good for us sales guys because we had something really to dangle the carrot in front of our clients. It was futuristic. It was massive amounts of volume. I mean, even now, if you put it next to a Manhattan 50, which I mentioned sort of from the early 2000s, it's incredible for the same length of boat how much more volume is. I mean, I remember when the 52 was first launched, we were told that if you didn't have the bigger platform, its LOA was 16 metres, which is exactly the same as what the 50 Manhattan was, and which is just mind-blowing really. Fortunate enough now, I think we've sold 3, maybe almost 4 of those boats over the last couple of years, and every client has been so happy with the boat. They run the D11 725s, 32 knots boat, probably that sort of speed, so more than fast enough. The flybridge is absolutely vast. As is the sort of accommodation wise. You've got 3 cabins. The third cabin doesn't have its own ensuite, but is a twin option, which is really nice. Hydraulic platform, and they have a crew cabin, so you can have the crew cab fit out, which provides you either with lots of storage or a realistic cabin for one person with its own bathroom, etc. And that's where the washing machine, etc. is done there as well. Moving on to something slightly bigger there, and that's the Sunseeker 28 metre. Now, the 28 metre was a very radical design when it came out, and even now still holds its own in design terms. It won a number of awards for its design, and the ethos behind it was to be able to stand in the saloon and sort of look aft and have this wraparound glass effect, which wasn't quite 100%, but almost there. And it gave you this amazing view from the saloon, and that in combination with its cabin layout and its flybridge layout and its crew cab arrangement really meant it was the sort of ideal family/charter boat, and it sold very, very well in good numbers to all markets. I haven't sold one to date, I have to admit. I've got a couple of clients out there that are looking for them, but I haven't actually done a deal on one yet. But they're good value now. They represent very good value for money, and a lot of them have been skip and maintained and to a very high standard. But have a look at that. I definitely recommend on Google image search to go and have a look. There's lots of other boats which I think are definitely noteworthy to mention, but like I say, there are a few that I thought you might like to just have a listen to, why I like them, why I think they're good boats, and what I do think are good boats in those brackets. Have a look, do go and have a look on Google and have a search for those boats. And I think what you'll be surprised at as well, if you're thinking about buying a boat, just at what level you can get into it. So if we rewind to the earliest podcast, I was talking about Portofino 31s. You can buy a nice Portofino 31 now for probably £20,000. And okay, yeah, it may not be perfect, but it's not going to be perfect, but it's a good boat. It's a very sound boat. And if you're willing to love and care and look after it, you can actually have a lot of fun with one of those boats. And even boats such as the Manhattan 50, and we've just done a deal last week, I think at 325 for a boat that's in the Med, and that's a lot of boat for the money. Superport 48s now, I mean, you can buy a Superport 48 for £100,000, maybe just over, and again, that's a lot of boat for the money. For beautiful performance, beautiful looking boat. So definitely go and have a look, and don't forget, please click subscribe to this podcast channel. Listen to my other podcasts. I'm quite new to this world, so what I'm doing is I'm starting to build up a bit of a library, and by which point I'm going to shout about it on my social media channels, which is Instagram at SunseekerTom. We're also on Facebook and YouTube, so go and have a look at those channels. Feel free to message me, DM me, whatever you want to do, but it'd be great to get some feedback. I'm starting to see some listens coming through now on the podcast, which is great, and I really appreciate that. Thank you. As I've said before, let me know if there's anything you'd like to know about. I've got some ideas, I've got some good content coming through, and we speak to you again soon. Thanks very much.